Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
This is my opening statement, and this is my opportunity to tell you about two things: my theory of the case and the anticipated facts that I believe you're going to hear throughout this case. Ultimately, though, I anticipate that the question that you are going to have to answer when you go into that jury room to deliberate after hearing all of the evidence over the course of the next few weeks, and beyond the elements that I need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, is whether this verdict is going to be first-degree murder or second-degree murder. That is, when Efrain Medina shot and killed Natalie Ramstrom, did he premeditate and deliberate before doing so? We'll talk about the difference between first and second-degree murder in closing arguments, but suffice it to say right now, first-degree murder requires an intent to kill that was acted upon with premeditation and deliberation. Second degree does not. Now, in addition to that question, and in any criminal case, not just in Michigan, but across the country, the prosecutor, and in this case, I need to prove identity. That is, you are going to have to conclude, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Efrain Medina is the one who pulled the trigger that killed Natalie Ramstrom. Why do I mention that to you now? Because I am up front going to tell you what you will not hear through the course of this trial. No witness that sits on that stand is going to point to Efrain Medina and say, I saw him pull the trigger and shoot and kill Natalie Ramstrom. I think you got that through our voir dire, that this is a circumstantial case. What I do anticipate presenting to you are a set of circumstances. A set of circumstances that overwhelmingly, inevitably, only lead to the conclusion that beyond a reasonable doubt, Efrain Medina is guilty of first-degree murder. I anticipate presenting that set of circumstances to you over the course of the next few weeks. The second part of an opening statement is to tell you what I anticipate you're going to hear through the several witnesses that are going to testify. And I'm going to do that now. In this case, we go back to October 27th of 2020. On that day, around 9 or 10 o'clock, Natalie Ramstrom's body was discovered at the address of 121 Catherine Street in River Rouge, Michigan, Wayne County. Her body was discovered by two individuals, Joelle Madrigal and Blanca Barrera, both of whom you'll hear from. And we're going to talk a lot about that property at 121 Catherine Street. The residents and the owners were Blanca, Joelle, and then Blanca's boyfriend or fiance or husband, Joe Manriquez. You're going to hear from all three of them, and they'll tell you about this. But on this property, there's a main house where those three lived at the time, and then a guest house. You will hear that the guest house was rented out. It was initially rented out to a couple of Mr. Medina's co-workers or union members. He was an electrician that worked at the Mac plant, but when he moved in, he took over that lease for the guest house as sort of a sublease. This was all in October of 2020. At that time, he was in a relationship with Natalie Ramstrom. Now, to understand how we get to her body being discovered on the 27th, we have to go back about a week prior to the Monday, the 19th, or Tuesday, the 20th of October in 2020. At that time, the defendant was living at that house, was staying there. He had taken over the lease. Natalie was coming from Indiana, where she was living at the time, to visit her boyfriend, the defendant. She arrives there earlier in the week, and as she arrives there, the defendant is keeping his work schedule. He works at the Mack Avenue plant, Chrysler or Stellantis plant at the time, or Chrysler plant at the time, and his schedule was second shift, meaning he would leave early afternoon and come back early morning hours the next day, about a 12-hour shift at the time. While he was at work, Natalie became friendly with Blanca and Joe, who lived in the main house at the time. She became friendly with Blanca specifically. I believe you'll hear that Blanca took her to a Walmart to get a few things, an air mattress, and things like that. Nothing too serious. And I believe that was on the Tuesday or Wednesday. On the Thursday, you'll hear about an outing that Blanca, Joe, and Natalie went to at Mr. K's Bar, which is a very important location in this case. On Thursday, though, the three of them proceed. This is the 22nd of October. Proceed to the bar, have a few beers, have a burger or whatever, eat some food, and proceed back home. Friday, everything is normal. Natalie Ramstrom's still around, the defendant's still around, going to work and whatnot. At this point, I anticipate you will hear that Blanca and Joelle got familiar with Natalie's routine. She had brought her dog Baxter with her from Indiana, and that they consistently saw her outside with the dog, playing with the dog, smoking cigarettes, whatever you have. They would see her around the property consistently. We now go to Saturday, October 24th. The defendant had left for work at an early afternoon. Blanca, Joe were having some sort of celebratory dinner for a member of their family. Natalie was invited over and had dinner with them. After that dinner, Natalie, Joe, Blanca, and one of Blanca's friends proceed back to Mr. K's. Mr. K's is a local neighborhood bar, has its fair share of regulars, some of whom Natalie had met on Thursday. They proceed back to that bar. Saturday night, around 10, 11 o'clock is when they walk in, and you're going to see video from inside the bar, a lot of video from inside the bar. You're going to see Natalie and the three others walk in. You're going to see how Natalie was acting, and no shame about it, she was drinking. Nothing wrong with that. She was having a good time. You'll see her talk to particularly two individuals, Barta Moores and David Reese, both of whom you will hear from. Barta Moores and David Reese were roommates at the time. She had briefly met them on Thursday. She recognized them, began talking with them. She was having a good time, dancing, and you'll see all of this on these videos. They stayed for a few hours. Eventually, Joe and Blanca wanted to leave. They take Natalie with them. They drive back the 1 block to the house at 121 Catherine Street. But before Natalie left, she told David and Bart that she would come back. You'll see on the video about 5-10 minutes after they leave, Natalie walks back in the bar. We're getting close to 2 a.m., so we're now into Sunday morning, early morning hours on the 25th. She's talking again after she comes back with Bart and David. Bart ends up ordering food, paying his tab, and leaving to go back to where he and David lived, which again is very close to the bar. Everything is within like a 3-block radius, and you'll see that, and you'll hear that from the witnesses. Natalie and David stay behind. They have one more drink. Natalie and David agree to go back to Bart and David's house. David texts Bart, asks if that's okay. He's not thrilled about it, but he says okay. About 15 minutes after David and Natalie leave, you'll see on that video the defendant, Efrain Medina, walk into the bar, presumably looking for Natalie because he had returned home from work. You'll see on another set of video from Tom's One Stop Auto Shop, which is a body shop very close to the 121 Catherine Street. You'll see the defendant's truck, a GMC Black Sierra, pull into that driveway for the guest house. You'll see shortly after that truck pulls out, presumably, and the timing I anticipate will match up when he goes to the bar to look for Natalie, does not find her. Natalie is at David's house. David and Natalie go upstairs to David's room. They proceed to have sexual intercourse. David will tell you that. He will talk about that. He'll talk about why he didn't initially disclose that to the police because he was embarrassed. When the defendant walked into Mr. K's bar, it caused the bar owner to do something. Amanda Morris, again, you will hear from her. It caused Amanda to text or call Bart, who was a regular at that time at the bar, saying that girl's boyfriend is looking for her. Bart is now pissed because he doesn't want any trouble at his house. He calls upstairs saying she's got to go. Natalie and David get their selves together, proceed down the stairs, and out of the door, David, I anticipate, will testify that he sees Natalie walk back towards Mr. K's and also back towards the 121 Catherine Street. That is the last time that David sees Natalie alive, that Bart sees Natalie alive. And also, the last time that Joe and Blanca saw Natalie alive was when they first left Mr. K's bar. From there, we go into very few important days. This is early Sunday morning. Everybody the next morning wakes up. Natalie is nowhere to be found. She's not in the yard with the dog. She's not talking to anyone. She's not interacting with anyone. I anticipate the evidence will show that she was killed in the early morning hours of Sunday, October 25th, 2020. Nobody will hear or see from her again until the 27th when her body is found. At one point on Sunday during the day, Baxter the dog is running around the yard by himself. I anticipate you'll hear from Natalie's family, probably today after opening statements, that would be highly unusual for her to let happen. Because the dog was running around, Blanca actually takes the dog in. She also goes into the guest house very briefly just to grab the dog's food, which was by the front door. The next day on Monday, when the defendant was up and had returned from work, he was still living at this location in the guest house. Joel returns the dog to him, and he will talk about that interaction that he had with the defendant at the front door of that guest house. The next day, we're now on Monday during the day. The next time that you will hear, there is one other time that Joe, I think it's later in the day on Monday, Joel and Blanca go into the house. They'll talk about that and not seeing anything out of the ordinary. The next time that anyone goes into that house is Tuesday, October 27th, around 9 or 10 at night. Defendant's not there, he's at work. They go into that house, and immediately when they open the door, they're met with the smell of natural gas. The gas was coming from the stove, the gas stove in the house. The gas stove was also clicking. Baxter, the dog, was in the bathroom on the first floor of this house, in the bathroom with the water running. Joel smells that. He goes in, he shuts off the stove, he opens the door to the bathroom, lets the dog out, and then turns around and looks at the floor, where he sees Natalie Ramstrom's body, her torso covered in garbage bags. There is another garbage bag on the floor that has some items related to this murder. He backs out of the house, he calls 911, and then the police begin to respond. Police and fire because of the gas smell. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important to divide up the two portions of this case, because we have everything that happened from the 19th or 20th until when Natalie's body was found on the 27th at night. At that point, the investigation begins. Police begin to respond. There are two things going on at this point. The police are gathering information from Joe, Blanca, and Joe at the scene, and they're also learning who was living in that house. They're also in the process of documenting and preserving that scene. I'm going to talk about the scene first, and then I'm going to talk about what they learned. The scene was processed by the Michigan State Police Crime Response Team. You're going to hear from an employee of the Michigan State Police named Guy Nutter. He was on that team that processed the scene. You're going to see several hundreds of photos from inside of this house. You will be intimately familiar with the inside of this guest house. When you see these photos, it will proceed in a manner throughout the house that is chronological. When they get to the kitchen, you will see Natalie's body, torso covered in a garbage bag, and on the floor, by her feet, you will see another garbage bag with some towels in it and a cutout section of carpet. That cutout section of carpet came from upstairs, because I believe the evidence will show Natalie was not killed in the kitchen. When we proceed upstairs to the bedrooms, there is one bedroom that has a bed frame and a mattress on it. The mattress, when they first encountered it, was covered by a comforter or a sheet. When they pulled that sheet back, there is a massive amount of blood staining on that sheet. That blood leaked out onto the floor. That's the section of carpet that was cut out and placed into a garbage bag. You will also see everything else about this house, all of the details, all of the nooks and crannies about it. Going back to what the police were doing at the scene, gathering information, they learned that Efrain Medina was living there and Natalie had come to visit. They also learned where he worked, which is at that Mack plant, the Chrysler plant on Mack Avenue in Detroit. They send officers over there to go and talk to him, most likely to arrest him at that time as well. Because, and you're going to hear from an employee of the security team at that plant at that time, from now working for Stellantis, Paul Kondratovich. He's going to talk about the policy of the plant. The officers, for whatever reason, and you can agree with it, I certainly don't, were not allowed in the plant to go and talk to the defendant. The security team told the police that they would go in and get him. I anticipate the evidence to show that the defendant knew that the police were at the proverbial front door, and he knew what had happened and why they were there. You will see video, again, a lot of video from inside the plant. We'll match that video up initially with a key fob time report that shows exactly when the defendant swiped into the plant, and then we will follow him around. That will take some time, and it will be a little bit exhausting because that program that this video is on is not exactly user-friendly, but we'll get through that. And you will see Efrain Medina moving around that plant, hiding in bushes, hiding in different areas of this plant, certainly not doing his job, certainly not leaving when his shift was over, because he was there for over 24 hours. Eventually, you will see an individual get into a truck and exit the plant. At this point, you will hear via stipulation that the defendant, after he left the plant, left the country to go to Mexico, where he stayed over a year. He did come back, and I anticipate the evidence will show he came back after the charges were filed in this case. You will also hear from many expert witnesses, forensic scientists, the medical examiner, or the doctor who performed the autopsy. That's Dr. Lokman Sung. He will tell you that Natalie Ramstrom died as a result of a gunshot wound. You'll see photos of that gunshot wound, which are to her head, and that the manner of death was homicide. And he'll talk about what both of those things mean. You will hear from fingerprint experts, latent print experts, same thing, DNA experts, talking about what DNA was found on a sexual assault kit that was done on Natalie, David Reese's, and the defendants. You will hear from a former employee of the Michigan State Police Latent Print Unit, Ashley Sellenrod. She is the one who tested the garbage bags for fingerprints. We'll talk a lot about that. We'll talk about why the bags had to be retested, but ultimately, you will hear that the defendant's fingerprint, I believe a thumbprint, was found on the garbage bag. Not the one on her torso, but the one with the cutout piece of paper or carpet and towels in it. You'll hear from some other shoe print experts. None of that's really going to, I think, sway you one way or the other, but we will present the evidence that we have. You will also hear about certain things that were not done. Maybe you'll think that they should be done. However, when we get to the closing arguments in this case, I will put up a timeline on the screen in the form of a PowerPoint. We will put the puzzle pieces together through the 20th to the 27th, through the investigation until today. And when I do that, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, the set of circumstances that I intend to present to you over the course of the next few weeks, I anticipate inevitably will lead to the conclusion that beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder and felony firearm. And that is exactly what I'm going to ask you to find them guilty of in a few weeks when we do closings. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Mr. Makepeace is right about one thing. This is our one opportunity, our initial opportunity to talk to you and give you not only our theories of the case, but also what we anticipate you'll hear and what you won't hear. And if you took anything away from our voir dire process and talking to you and finding out from you as jurors, you took away one thing, and I hope that remains with you, is this chart. Even as I listened to Mr. Makepeace making his opening statement, he wants to negate significant aspects of this particular case. My theory of this case, one, is a failure when it's an absolute obligation for the government, the police, to bring you something that will allow you to make a decision that goes and follows along with that charter of beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's not forget what that is. So that, but also this is another aspect of this case is I call it the hometown team. As we know, this unfortunate event occurred and the investigation started in River Rouge. Small town. We're in Wayne County. I imagine everyone knows that city. And in that town, what you have is a situation that the police don't ever give you the opportunity to make that determination. So let's talk about what happened. We have October 21st, you'll hear testimony that Ms. Ramstrom comes to the city of River Rouge. You'll hear testimony, what I anticipate you'll hear testimony that she's there to drop off Mr. Medina's vehicle. What I'll add to you in there is that not only is her vehicle there, but Mr. Medina's vehicle. Do you know that in this trial, I don't anticipate that you're going to get any forensic. When we talk about forensic, we're talking about, I should just say evidence, rather than any evidence from those vehicles. No fibers, nothing inside. In fact, you will not get any cell phone information. And everybody has a cell phone today. There's something called, you'll hear questions about triangulation, about cell phone data. You'll hear about things that were in cell phones, but you will never have an opportunity to see it. So therefore, you have to rely upon witnesses whose clear credibility is being challenged here, is being attacked for various different reasons. So what you have is Ms. Ramstrom comes. She then, some of which consistent with Mr. Makepeace says, she then meets Blanca Barrera. They also go shopping for a mattress for herself, and I believe some clothes and items from the store. They go to Sam's and Walmart. I believe that's what you'll hear. And at some point in time, you'll hear that they then go to a bar on Thursday night. You'll hear that this bar is a local bar maybe a block from this house on Catherine Street. They'll go to this bar, have burgers, and you see from that video, those individuals. You'll see Ms. Ramstrom, you'll see Natalie, you'll see Blanca, you'll see Joe Manriquez, and you'll see them interact with other people in the bar. One in particular was Bart. You'll hear his name, and you'll hear David. That ends, and you'll see another video from the bar from Saturday night going into Sunday morning. And you'll see in there on the Saturday night that it's a lot more crowded. You'll see at least one police officer walking around in his uniform, partying in there, much to what I indicate, the hometown team. And then you will see those individuals, Joe, Blanca, Natalie, and another friend in the bar. And ultimately, Natalie goes and talks to Bart and David and some other individuals who are at the bar. Joe and Blanca are seated at a table. That goes on. They ultimately leave. And in fact, Ms. Ramstrom or Natalie comes back. She comes back, and when she comes back, she's there for some time, and then she ultimately leaves with David Reese. They go, by the testimony you'll hear, they go to David Reese's house, which he shares with Bart, or maybe it's Bart's house that David's staying there. But he comes there, and they're there for some time. And I want you to take particular attention to this. At some point in time, you'll hear that David Reese makes a statement. He makes a statement, I believe, November 5th or November 6th. We will see the statement. And at some point in time, you'll hear that David Reese and Bart came together. At another point in time, you'll hear they came separately. Nonetheless, is a statement. And you'll see, no, in fact, you will not see. The videotape that you were supposed to see of David Reese's statement doesn't exist.
Judge, may we approach?
Now, just one second. Good morning again.
Good morning.
So, the video that we talked about of David Reese no longer exists. I'll phrase it like that. Now, and I believe that's what the evidence will show. Also in that evidence, what you will hear is you will hear questions about his writing, his actual writing of the statement. And as much, and it's very important to look at this detail, it is a point in time in which he writes in his statement, he says, at 3:53, sometime in the morning, and at is capitalized, which I believe that the evidence will show that at that time he was still with Ms. Ramstrom. And what you'll also see, or what you'll also hear from the testimony, is that at a point in time, after writing that statement, you can tell it's a distinction in the handwriting. He has a conversation with the officer in charge, Mr. Arapakis. And after having that statement, he then writes again, at 3:53, he received or made a phone call. Different and significant. And along the way, I want you to look at those things. Now, you'll also hear that, and I think Mr. Makepeace glosses over this, he says that they had sex. When he's talking to him in November of 2020, he says they had, he said he used his finger in having sexual relations. That's what he said. It wasn't until his DNA, I believe, was taken in August of 2022, and thereafter it was revealed that he clearly had sex. And I'm talking about penis to vagina or penis to anal area, because his DNA was there. What I believe the evidence will show is that he lied. What I believe the evidence will show is that he had reason to lie. I do believe that the evidence will show that he is the last person. And perhaps Barbara Morris, his roommate, are the last people from the evidence that you'll hear in this case to see her alive. Now, you'll also hear that Mr. Reese only describes one time that he was there. You'll also hear evidence that in this particular case, that leading up to the unfaithful day of the 27th of October, you'll hear evidence that Miss Barrera Blanca, her grandson, and at some point in time, Joe Manriquez, have gone in and out of this house from that Sunday, which I believe would be the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th. They have a key to this residence. They have access to this residence. They go in this residence and they describe nothing out of place. In fact, at some point in time they describe, you'll hear the evidence show that they will describe that on Monday, there was nothing there. On Tuesday, her clothes, her shoes were there, and other items that were there that weren't there on Monday. But yet they've been, and the evidence will show, they've been through this house. They come in and get the dog, come in and get dog food, and that's what the evidence will show. And as a result of that, there was never any investigation of them. What I mean by that is, there was never, the evidence will not show that their DNA was taken. The evidence will not show that they were ever fingerprinted. Other than those statements, there was no investigation into these individuals who had access to this particular place. What the evidence will show is that even prior to talking to David Reese and Bart Morris, the evidence will show that Mr. Arapakis made up his mind that at the outset that it was Mr. Medina who did this. We know that because he sought a warrant on November 4th. He had made up his mind at that point. And what he did not do, what he never, what will never have been done, because we'll get to those other things that are not going to be in there, is allow for the evidence to lead him to that belief other than making a supposition based upon what he had at that point. And what we have from, other than Mr. Medina, this being his place, what you will see, what you will hear is, yes, this is his place, but so many others have access. There's no information, and I don't suspect you'll hear any information, and I might be corrected wrong, but I don't recall, that there'll be any evidence as to whether or not anybody made any determination that that second door was unlocked or unlocked. There are two access points at this particular location. So what the evidence will show is that when Mr. Makepeace talks about one fingerprint on a bag, a garbage bag that's in Mr. Medina's temporary residence, is on the outside of the bag. One fingerprint on a bag that's in your house. And he also says, yes, there's evidence of DNA with Ms. Ramstrom. And it wouldn't necessarily be, if they're in a relationship, as some of the testimony will say, that's not necessarily a significant issue. But what he didn't tell you is that there's limited support. The forensic expert will tell you there is limited support that evidence or that DNA belongs to Mr. Medina. When we talk about David Reese, you'll see substantial support. You'll see, I think the number might be 1 million times likely that it's Mr. Reese, where Mr. Medina 13 times. And you'll hear from the expert what that means and how significant that is. But more importantly, how significant you're getting the information in a way that you understand it and how it makes sense to us and how you interpret it. But you'll then hear other evidence that they go to the plant, and you'll see, or they'll put on evidence to say that Mr. Medina is at that plant and that he's there for 24 hours. But yet and still, you'll see there's a card reader at that plant. And that card reader, if you go in and out of that plant, and that card reader will suggest, will tell you how many times that particular card was used to go in and out. But that's not even, that is not truth positive that he's there. Number one, you'll see in the witness that used to work at the Stellantis plant, I don't know if he still works there or not, he will testify that the end letter E means enter and the other letter X means exit. Then the evidence will show from his report it's an E and an E. So there is some dysfunction and some reason why you cannot trust this system and make a determination as to whether he's there or not. If you have X, where's the E? If you believe that is the absolute way that you tell whether he's in the plant or he left the plant, how do you have E and E and no E, X, E? It would have to be that way, and that's what the evidence will show. Now, the evidence will show, and we agree this by something called a stipulation, that Mr. Medina did go to Mexico. The evidence will show that he did return and voluntarily surrender. And that's what that aspect of the evidence will show. And we talked about that in voir dire. Now, you'll also hear, this is significant here, and you'll hear a lot of other things. I'm sure Mr. Makepeace has got a lot of other things to tell you, and I've got a lot more that I want you to peer into and watch. But along the way of investigating this, you'll see that the evidence will show that River Rouge is a small town. They don't have their own forensic and tech team and those types of scientists as many small cities in the state of Michigan do not. And many cities, you'll learn, will contact the Michigan State Police to provide that service. Michigan State Police calls them customers. Their customers are usually agencies or municipalities or cities. And they were called in to perform the services. They perform the services that are directed to be performed by the officer in charge, at least in this case. That's what the evidence will show. And they came in and they collected evidence, and they collected all this evidence, and out of all the evidence, that's what the evidence will show as it relates to Mr. Medina. But you also understand, we didn't get, the evidence will show we didn't get the real story from Mr. Reese until he was compelled to do so. He was forced to do so when that evidence came through. But more importantly, you'll hear from the evidence from those scientists who told Mr. Arapakis, or officer in charge, Arapakis, to do certain things. And officer in charge will tell you, I did not. Did you do cell phone triangulation? I did not. Not to say that he was told to do that, but he did not. Did you go and get palm prints? Initially, did you get palm prints or toe prints from Bart or David? I did not. what you'll hear is that it was not until a very late time that he actually sought the DNA from Mr. Medina. But we have what we have. And again, that's what the evidence will show. What the evidence will show is that when we hold Mr. Makepeace to his proofs, when we hold him to what we have an understanding of what it means to be beyond a reasonable doubt, there is doubt when the last person around has not made a truthful statement. The last person to admit that they saw Ms. Ramstrom is not truthful. There is doubt when we have an officer in charge who does not do the things that his forensic scientists, those experts that he calls to do in and do certain work. There is doubt. And then you're going to hear from Dr. Lockman's son, who is the medical examiner in this. You're also going to hear that in that medical examiner's report that they had to do some additional work to correct or some corrective actions to that report. You'll also hear from an expert that we're going to call Dr. Dragovich. And Dr. Dragovich, and I want you to focus in on this because unless you have medical background or maybe you have a desire to research certain things, there's this thing called lividity. And I want you to focus in on this lividity. And you will hear how lividity becomes fixed. And we might know what some people might know from just casual watching of movies, something called rigor mortis. But lividity is a similar concept, but it is the pooling of blood in the body. And at a certain point in time, after that expiration of time, that becomes fixed, meaning that it stays in one place. You'll hear evidence that when the body was discovered, that it was in one place. And by the time we get to the autopsy, there's in additional places. So what does that tell you, what the evidence was telling you? It's telling you that we're not talking about the early morning hours of the 25th. We're talking about a closer period in time, closer to the 27th, closer to the time in which Mr. Medina is at work, closer in time, because by the time we see those other photographs, we're talking about the next day. We're talking about the 28th. And that's what the evidence will show. So I ask you to look at all of this evidence and, again, putting them to the test in this case and removing what could be obvious sympathy for the loss of life. And when you do that and you apply those principles and those standards, the evidence will show they are far and away. They are not at that 60 to 70%. This is not Comerica Park. This is not the Ambassador Bridge. This is a charge, an accusation that's been made against Mr. Medina, which they fall short significantly. And I'm asking you, as I'm asking you right now, at the close of proofs, I get one more chance to talk to you. Mr. Makepeace gets twice because it's his burden. I'm asking you now, as I'll ask you then, to find Mr. Medina not guilty. Thank you.